Before we begin, understand this. What you're about to hear is not rumor, not tabloid noise, and certainly not comedy. This is the sworn federal courtroom testimony of Eddie Murphy, one of the most iconic entertainers of our time, speaking under oath, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Day 12 of the Diddy trial was supposed to be procedural, a blur of paperwork and legal motions. The kind of day reporters show up late for and jurors quietly endure. But then, without announcement, without warning, Eddie Murphy entered the courtroom through a side door. Conversation stopped. Reporters scrambled. Diddy froze in his seat. Even his own legal team looked blindsided. The energy shifted in an instant. Eddie didn't wave, didn't smirk. He wasn't here for fanfare or attention. He walked directly to the stand with the posture of a man who had carried something heavy for far too long. When asked to state his name for the record, he did so simply. But then, instead of looking at the judge or jury, he turned his gaze directly to Diddy and said, "I left Hollywood because of what I saw, and because I couldn't unsee it." The room held its breath. He began with 2006. At the time, Eddie's career was experiencing a revival. New movie offers, awards buzz, studio deals. His phone was ringing off the hook. "It was like being in my 20s again," he said. People who hadn't called me in years were suddenly saying I was the missing piece in their next big hit. That's when he received the invite. A quiet call from a well-known producer, no press, no contracts, just a private gathering in the Hollywood Hills. Eddie hesitated but said yes. He'd heard whispers for years about these exclusive parties. Some called them networking gold mines. Others spoke of them like folklore, strange, secretive, powerful. He expected champagne, music, posturing. What he found was something else entirely. The moment he arrived, he knew something was wrong. The estate was massive, surrounded by forested hills, locked behind a biometric gate that scanned his face before granting entry. Valets in matching black suits took his phone without a word. One handed him a small black card that read only, "Tonight, be who you really are." Inside, the energy wasn't alive. It was cold. No music, no mingling, just low voices and eyes that didn't blink long enough. The main lounge was filled with people Eddie recognized, actors, executives, athletes, but something about them felt off. Not drunk, not high, just artificial. Like they were all playing roles they hadn't chosen. Then Diddy appeared. He moved through the room with a practiced calm, greeting people like royalty. When he reached Eddie, he smiled, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Brother Russa, it's about time you came home." Eddie didn't know what he meant by that, but it didn't sound like Hollywood. Diddy guided him through the house like he was proud of it, but not in the way someone shows off architecture or furniture. It was like he was proud of what the place represented, of the power it held. He pointed at different guests, whispering in Eddie's ear, "That guy just greenlit a $200 million film. That one, he eats out of my hand now." Then they reached a large, thick wooden door at the end of a hallway. Diddy turned, looked Eddie dead in the eyes and said, "This is where the choices get made. You want to stay funny and broke, or you want to level up?" Eddie laughed, thinking it was a joke. Diddy didn't laugh. There was a camera tripod visible through a crack in the door, not hidden, just sitting there openly. People were going into the room one by one. Some looked terrified going in. Others came out smiling like they'd just been handed their dream role. A few came out different, empty, as if something had been taken from them and replaced. Eddie backed away, said he needed a drink. Diddy smiled again. "No rush. We're all family here." But that's when everything shifted. The line in the sand was clear. This wasn't a party anymore. It was a test. Eddie walked outside to breathe. The night air was sharp. He was about to leave when a woman at the exit blocked his path and handed him a drink. "You're not done yet, are you?" she asked on Nobody Leaves Before the Experience. That word, experience, it stuck with him. It wasn't said casually, it was rehearsed. So he went back in just to understand, just to see. And what he saw in the next room would stay with him forever. They led a small group of guests into a darkened dining room lined with velvet curtains. No music, just dim candlelight and a long, narrow table. Each seat had a silver tray in front of it covered. At the head of the table stood Diddy, smiling like a ringmaster. "Tonight's about how far you'll go," he said, "because greatness doesn't come cheap." He pointed to one of the guests, Dwayne Johnson. A man in white gloves removed the lid from Johnson's tray. Raw monkey brains, pink, steaming. Some guests laughed nervously, others turned away. Diddy clapped his hands once. Well, come on, rock! You eat that, the roll is yours. Dwayne hesitated, looked around, and then he did it. He ate it. Diddy clapped again, louder. That's what I'm talking about. Then he looked down the table, eyes locked on Eddie. You ready, preacher boy? Eddie shook his head. I didn't come here for this. Diddy leaned in. Then why are you here? The room was still, heavy. No one laughed now. Eddie stood up and walked out. Not fast, just done. Diddy didn't stop him. But as Eddie neared the door, he heard Diddy's voice behind him. Calm, cutting. You'll be back when you're ready to really make it. Eddie never went back. But what followed was a silence louder than any shout. Projects disappeared. Calls stopped. His agent, who had worked with him for years, vanished. One producer, who'd begged him to headline a franchise, suddenly said the studio was going in another direction. Eddie tried to explain it away. Bad timing, shifting trends. But then he saw an internal email, his name next to two words, not aligned, and that's when it clicked. He hadn't just walked out of a party, he'd walked out of an invisible inner chamber of Hollywood, the one nobody talks about, the one behind the velvet rope, where deals are sealed in shadows, where humiliation is currency, where silence buys success. He wasn't fired, he was erased. And that's how the machine does it. No explosions, no drama, just nothing. Meetings that go nowhere, projects that stall, smiles in the room but no follow-ups, compliments that fade into silence. He became a ghost in an industry he once owned, and that's when he knew he was on the blacklist. Not because he failed, but because he said no, because he refused to be initiated, because he didn't eat the damn monkey brains. He started asking around quietly. What had happened? What had changed? One executive told a mutual friend he didn't pass the test. When asked what that meant, the response was chilling. He said no when he was supposed to say yes. That was all it took. One refusal, one moment of defiance, and the doors didn't slam, they just stopped opening. The machine didn't need to blacklist you publicly. It just needed to convince others that you weren't safe to hire, that you were unpredictable, a liability, that you asked the wrong questions. Eddie told the court that his name went from must-have to not now in under 6 months. He described feeling like he was walking just outside the gates of the city he helped build, watching the lights from the outside, and then came the part of the testimony that shifted the room from quiet to dead silence. There's a list, Eddie said, not a written one, not a document, but everyone knows it's real. It's the list of people you don't criticize, people whose names you never speak in the wrong tone, the untouchables. He didn't pause before naming them. Diddy's on that list. Tyler Perry's on that list. Oprah Winfrey? She helped write it. The air thickened. He explained it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It wasn't paranoia. It was real, enforced not with rules, but with precision. Step out of line, speak the wrong truth, and the whispers start. Not aligned. Unreliable, too risky. One actor, once a close friend, pulled him aside after the party and said quietly, "You're crossing the line, man. They don't come back for people who cross it." That actor never spoke to Eddie again. That's the cost of truth. You don't just lose jobs. You lose your circle, your community, your name. The prosecution submitted emails and texts to prove Eddie's claims, studio memos with phrases like, "Pass on Murphy," "timing off," and "not a good fit right now." But one stood out. He's not aligned. When the court asked him what that phrase really meant, he didn't hesitate. It means I didn't play the game. He leaned in and said, Hollywood's blacklist doesn't wear a name tag. It wears a smile. It shakes your hand while it erases you. He testified that he was never labeled for causing harm, but for refusing to be harmed. And then he cut deeper. There are others, he said, others whose careers vanished for the same reason, because they turned down the parties, because they walked out of the back rooms. And we act like it's coincidence. It's not. He said that Hollywood doesn't just make movies, it makes myths. And the biggest myth of all is that success is about talent. It's not, he said, it's about compliance. That's when he dropped the most damning part of the entire testimony. You think Diddy blackballed people alone? He asked. Number he had help. He had protection. He had a whole damn network. He looked at the jury and said, "This isn't just about what happened in that house. It's about how many people kept it quiet, how many signed checks to make it disappear, how many built empires while others vanished." The courtroom sat frozen. The judge called for a brief recess. When Eddie stood, dozens in the courtroom stood with him, not because they had to, because they felt something deeper: respect. When court resumed, the air had changed. He was no longer just a witness. He was a symbol. The prosecution asked how this ordeal affected him personally. Eddie looked out over the courtroom, his voice softer now. "It broke me, not in one blow, piece by piece." He said, "A career doesn't collapse like a building. It dissolves, slowly, cruelly. I stopped talking about it. I didn't tell friends. I didn't tell my team, because who would believe me? And worse, if they did, they'd be next." He described long periods of silence, days where he didn't leave the house, where he sat in the same chair, staring at the wall, reliving that night, not because of what happened to him, but because of what he saw happen to others, the fear in their eyes, the fake smiles, the desperation. He said he leaned on his children. Their laughter kept him grounded, reminded him what was real. He turned to faith, not as a public brand, but as a survival tool. "I stopped asking God why," he said. "I started asking when. When would I speak? When would the world listen?" He sought therapy, spiritual guidance, not because he was weak, but because he needed someone to help carry the weight of watching people sell their souls in real time. He admitted he often wondered, should I have done more? Should I have pulled someone out of that room with me? But now, standing in court, he realized the most dangerous thing he did was stay silent. When asked why he never wrote a book, never did an interview, Eddie gave a bitter smile. Because the people who own the microphones are the same people who own the secrets. He paused, then said something that echoed off the walls. "I lost the spotlight, but I found my peace. And honestly, that was the first real role I ever played, a man free from the lie." The prosecutor asked one final question. "Why now? Why speak today?" Eddie exhaled, thought for a long moment, and answered, "Because the walls are finally falling." He said he watched Cassie Ventura take the stand, heard her voice crack as she described her pain.